Over the course of 8 years and 6 months, a group of dedicated but greatly outmanned and outgunned soldiers from the American colonies performed the unimaginable. They successfully defeated a vastly superior and more well-equipped British Army and Navy, an event that culminated in the signing of the historical Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776, at which time the United States of America became a separate, independent nation. In those initial days of America's infancy, the bedrock and foundations of this great country were laid.
The fact that America fought for and won its national independence is, of course, a well-known fact of American history. But what many Americans are not quite so aware of is the important link that the Bible, that's right, that the Bible actually played in making America the single most successful government of all time, now being the longest ongoing constitutional republic in the history of the world. Both the Bible and America are unique. Both of their achievements are unmatched. But what many Americans don't know is that the two accomplishments are not unrelated. In fact, the Bible has had a very direct impact on the success of America's uniquely successful government, an impact that was widely understood and acknowledged by previous generations, but an impact that's largely unknown today. So in this program, we're going to see firsthand the historical records that categorically prove the Bible has directly affected the most important aspects of our culture, including our system of government, law, education, our free enterprise system, our views of private property, our social services, and so many other aspects of our culture. I hope you'll join us as we go back in time and review the historical records documenting the impact that the Bible has had on American life and culture over the past 4 centuries. Perhaps part of the reason that so many today don't recognize the substantive influence of the Bible on America is that today too little time is spent reading and studying the Bible. But such was not the case in previous generations. On the contrary, our forefathers made the Bible a centerpiece of their lives, not just a convenient add-on. For example, the Pilgrims could spend up to several hours each day in studying their Bibles. And during the founding era, many of America's most prominent statesmen made it their habit not merely to read their Bibles, but to read through their Bibles once each year, and to study their Bibles seeking practical insight for their day-to-day and personal and civic lives. Too many today, however, consider the Bible to be, at best, nothing more than just a spiritual devotional book. By and large, it's no longer seen as a practical guidebook that has the potential to safely direct every aspect of daily life and living. Early Americans, however, knew that the Bible held forth not just eternal and spiritual benefits, but it also held forth immediate and practical benefits both for individuals and for their societies. In fact, many Americans today are surprised to discover just how many famous Americans of the past forcefully urged the importance of reading and studying the Bible. For example, statesman and patriot Patrick Henry declared,
"The Bible is a book worth more than all the other books that were ever printed."
And famous educator Noah Webster also forcefully announced,
"The Bible is the chief moral cause of all that is good and the best corrector of all that is evil in human society. The best book for regulating the temporal, that is, the secular concerns of men."
And Dr. Benjamin Rush, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, urged,
"The Bible should be read in our schools in preference to all other books from its containing the greatest portion of that kind of knowledge which is calculated to produce private and public happiness."
And Daniel Webster, the great defender of the Constitution, declared,
"To the free and universal reading of the Bible, men are much indebted for right views of civil liberty, The Bible is a book which teaches man his own individual responsibility, his own dignity, and his equality with his fellow man.
In order to help us understand today what earlier generations long recognized, let's review some of the significant contributions made by the Bible to our society. Now, I could probably select a significant example from every year of American history, but in the interest of time, I've chosen only a few highlights that I believe will more than amply document the Bible's influence on America. Let's start back with our early beginnings in the 1620s and 1630s, the time of the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Those early colonists came to America seeking both civil and religious liberty. And they arrived on America's shores with one book in particular, the Bible. Yet it was not just any Bible they carried to America. It was a very specific Bible. In fact, the famous painting of the embarkation of the Pilgrims that hangs in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol accurately shows that the open Bible before them is the Geneva Bible. Here is an actual original copy of one of the early Geneva Bibles brought here by the Puritans. Now, this particular Bible was printed in 1519 and was carried to America by the Arthur Upton family. In the front of the Bible are even the birth records of their children, born in 1627, 1629, 1631, and so forth. The Geneva Bible was the particular favorite of those who had been persecuted for their religious beliefs in England and Europe, and who had come to America as a result. It became the most popular Bible of that time, going through 140 different reprints in the period from 1560 to 1644. The Geneva Bible revolutionized the New World in general, and America in particular. The Bible is often shown prominently in paintings of the Pilgrims, and most of the persecution against them had been because they had embraced the Bible teachings of the Reformation. Recall that the Reformation had begun when priests and ministers began to question centuries-long practices of the church that they believed did not conform to the Scriptures. The result of godly priests like Martin Luther and others challenging the practices of an increasingly apostate church was twofold. On the one hand, it prompted harsh persecution from both church and state leaders against the sinners. But on the other hand, it eventually resulted in major reforms within the Catholic Church, and it also birthed what later came to be known as the Protestant Church. So what were some of the issues raised by the dissenters that eventually caused a revolution within the church? The dissenters' primary concerns were twofold. First, they wanted people to have access to a Bible so that they could read it for themselves. And second, they wanted to conform the culture to God's Word rather than vice versa. Now, on the first point, the church leaders of that day had insisted that the Bible be placed only in churches and that it be written in a language that was not the language of the common people, thus effectively keeping a knowledge of God's Word out of the hands of the average citizen. On the second point, the reformers exposed cultural customs that did not have a firm basis in God's Word. Take, for example, what they did with civil government. Now, if you'd lived virtually anywhere in the old world 4 centuries ago, you would have been ruled by a king, whether in England or France or Spain or Portugal or the Netherlands or Romania or Sweden or nearly any other European nation. In fact, all those nations had been ruled by kings for centuries. Citizens were accustomed to a monarchical form of government. And even the casual observer of the Bible knows that kings were featured prominently throughout the Bible. I mean, consider King Saul, King David, King Solomon, King Rehoboam, King Josiah, King Jehoshaphat, and so forth. Therefore, an easy assumption to make in that day would have been that God preferred monarchies. Yet a closer study of the Bible reveals that the governmental system of monarchies was actually not God's preference. Recall that God even sent the prophet Samuel to dissuade his people from monarchies. But Israel demanded kings anyway. So what was the biblical form of government before kings? It was what may be termed a republic. In Exodus 18:21, the people were told to choose out from among themselves leaders of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. That is, to select officials at what we today would call the local, county, state, and federal levels.
But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and tens.
Understanding this biblical truth, it's not surprising that the early colonists who arrived in America soon established representative governments based on scriptural principles. By 1619, Virginia had an elected legislature. And when the Pilgrims arrived in Massachusetts in 1620, in the famous Mayflower Compact, they similarly announced that they, too, would be self-governed. So how does all of this relate to the Geneva Bible? Well, the one thing that made the Geneva Bible distinctive from all other Bibles at that time was its marginal commentaries on the Scriptures. Commentaries by prominent reformers such as Martin Luther, John Knox, and others. It was through these commentaries that the reformers challenged the culture, pointing out where cultural customs differed from scriptural teachings. Since the Pilgrims would spend up to several hours a day in the Scriptures, it's not surprising that their study of the Bible produced significant changes in their thinking and therefore in their practices.